Be bold. Be heard. Welcome to Unmute Your Mic with your host, Jessica Bell. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Unmute Your Mic.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. My name is Jessica Bell. I am your host from Kansas City, Missouri, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. If this is your first time, welcome to the Unmute Your Mic family. If you're a returning listener, thank you for being a part of the family. Before we get started, please make sure to like, subscribe, and follow on Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else that you would find the podcast. I'm so excited for our guest today. Her name is Angela. She is in New York. I'm excited for you to hear her story, learn about her ministry. Angela, thank you so much for agreeing to be on my platform today. If you could just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you.
Hi, so my name is Angela Paganelli, and I am the founder of Foster Blessings, which is based out of Evangelical Free Church in Clinton Corners, New York, tiny little town, but mighty stuff. And so basically the idea came from foster families have usually hours, if they're lucky, a day to take children or a child into their home. And along with that comes CPS workers and caseworkers and a whole stream of a couple of days worth of work. And we realized that when a biological family has a baby, then, there's meal trains, there's gifts, there's all kinds of support. But when a foster family gets a child, there wasn't really anything out there. And so we decided we are going to make some meals for some foster families. And it started off as just a simple, we were in our church kitchen just making some meals. Before the pandemic, it was definitely a lot more volume. We were probably up to about 1 or 2 a week. But since the pandemic, everything has slowed down. So we are still very active. There just aren't really that many children being removed and placed right now. So we are still going strong and supporting the foster families. And it has been quite a ride, I can tell you, quite a ride.
That's what I was going to ask you. So that's such a beautiful thing, because I think that's a really important part that you mentioned, is that when someone is having a child, you get all this time to prepare, and you know that you're pregnant, and you got the baby shower, and once you have the baby, you have everybody to assist you. But doing foster care, like you said, it may be you get a phone call and then you have a child. And so I love that you said the reason why you started it, but can you talk a little bit more on the personal level as to why you wanted to be a part of something like this or start something like this?
So my foster care journey actually started when I was 13. Until I was 13, my 5-year-old sister and I lived with our mother. Looking back, she did have some pretty serious mental issues, and we were in and out of homeless shelters and battered women's shelters. The day that she went into a coma, we were actually living in a battered women's shelter, and she never really left us anywhere. She was very, very guarded with us. And she left that day and just said, I'll be back in a little bit. So she must have known that something was wrong health-wise. Got to the hospital and she ended up going into a coma. We went to live with my aunt and uncle, who are beautiful, beautiful people. Amazing. They were retired. They had 2 grown children who were gone, married. And here comes 13 and a 5-year-old. And the first night we actually had pizza, which I thought was really great. But I think it was day 3 or 4, they made salmon and spinach. And my sister and I were like, well, we're going to starve here. That's what's going to happen. And so that was really an important part of the ministry, was that the first day was going to be pizza delivered because it's familiar and every kid loves pizza. But also that the continued meals would also be familiar. So things like macaroni and cheese and meatloaf and things that they would probably recognize. And when we were cooking in our kitchen, that's what we did. Now we're relying on, my mother is rolling in her grave, I'm quite sure, frozen lasagna and frozen blackened chicken with pasta from Sam's Club. We love Sam's Club. But that's really where this idea kind of came from for the food, was, just the idea that we could support these foster families, and be that support that a lot of the people on the foster care delivery team are touched some way by foster care. They've adopted. Our pastor and his wife actually went through the classes. They were never able to take children, but they understand a lot of what's going on. So it's great for, to walk into a house and be like, okay, who's your judge? Who's your caseworker? How are you doing with this? It's just that added level of support that's just amazing.
And I think support is so important because I think oftentimes there's kind of like this, I don't want to say this like common misconception, but people don't often see foster children as like the family's children. And so you don't often get the same support as you would get if you were having a child naturally, because people are, they're kind of like, well, why are you doing that? Or they don't see that, they don't feel that you need as much support. And in all actuality, you probably need a little bit more because it is a difficult situation for not only the parents, but for the children who have been removed and placed into this environment. And so I'm loving that how you use food almost as a way to like be the connecting piece to offer some more support. Because, I'm actually in the process of taking classes to become a foster parent. And one of the things I realized is like these children, they have whole paths before they got to you. And so at least giving them something that is common or familiar, such as, we always would eat pizza on Mondays or something like that, really can help tie things together. And so when you offer these services to families, how do they find you? How are you aware of these new families that are taking in foster children?
So we work very closely with our community family services. And I speak at the MAP class trainings, just kind of give my story and, tell everybody what to expect. And we do like community days. We went to the foster care picnic. And so people call the ministry directly, but we also work through, like, if, our caseworker she gets an 85-year-old grandmother and she's taking in 3 children, she's going to say, hey, do you want some meals to support you through those first couple days? And so sometimes the caseworker calls directly. Also, if a family is going through illness, we have a couple families that have cancer. If we have somebody that's having surgery, then we'll provide the same services. Or even just, foster family who's just really struggling. We had one woman, she took in, I think it was 3 autistic children at once. I mean, she needed support. That was incredibly brave and wonderful of her. And she's actually been a foster parent for close to 20 years. And amazing, amazing woman. But that's kind of where that started. And we also had one of our placements, our personal placement, was a little girl. She got here at 11:30 at night, and she was so distraught from being taken from her mother that she actually got sick in the car. And so brought her in. She was 2.5 at the time. And it was dark, we kept the lights kind of low, but she was like crying, waking up in the middle of the night, crying so hard that I just sat in the seat with her and just kind of rocked her all night. And the next morning I woke up, it was daytime, and I looked down, and in her hair was just bugs, lice like I have never seen. And she had been to the doctor and somehow they had missed it. So for 2 weeks, we, literally nitpicked because she had it so often that she was immune to the medication. And so we literally just had to pick and pick and pick. And my daughters have very long hair, and basically had to quarantine for 2 weeks until, everybody was cleared. And a friend brought over meals, and I was like, oh, that's kind of genius. Okay. I like that idea. I didn't have to cook that day. And so that kind of was where this was born also, was from, just the neighbor bringing over some meals.
And thank you for sharing that story, because that was going to be one of my next questions for you too. Does your family currently foster? Is that something that you're still doing? And what are some of just the experiences that people who are considering being foster parents kind of have to understand, because we all take these classes and we hear about like the textbook way of how to deal with a lot of stuff, but it often doesn't really mean a whole lot until we're experiencing it ourselves. So what were some of the things that you kind of experienced where you were like, yeah, I wish I knew this when I had taken my class, or this is different, or that kind of thing?
I would say no case is cookie cutter. I mean, we have one little boy, he's 4.5. We adopted him. He is autistic. It was very obvious. He has 10 siblings. They're all on the spectrum. They're all adopted. The parents have never touched drugs, never touched alcohol, just very low IQ. And that was very hard because mom really thought she was going to get him back. And so in New York State, we have to wait a year that a child's in care in order to file for termination of parental rights. And that whole year, she worked so hard. And it was heartbreaking to know that this wasn't going to happen. And unfortunately, the judge can grant 2 visits a year, and he did not do that. They get 2 letters a year, which I'm, pour everything into those letters as much as I can. But unfortunately, that's just how New York works. And so we did have one little boy. We had him for, I think, about a year and a half. And I actually knew the parents. It was a really odd situation, but I knew the parents when he came to our house to live. And they got themselves cleaned up. It took them about a year and a half, but they did it. And when I got to bring him home on the day that the judge said that they could be reunified, I was ecstatic. I was so excited for this little kid to be with his mom. I got to bring him. I got to, walk him to his door, come in, hug them all, And then I got home and the crib was there. And I realized, like, wow, that hurts a lot. This little boy who called me mom for the last year and a half is, funny story. I was actually babysitting him the next day. But still, I spent that whole night sobbing. My husband was like just distraught, and it's a weird thing because it's not your child, but you love them so, so much that, they're in your home.
Yeah, and that I feel like it takes a special kind of person to be able to be a foster parent, because you want what's best for the child, even if sometimes it's not always what's best for you, because you would love to keep the child in your house and continue raising them. And I think that is a hard spot to be in, because you really have to be selfless. Because the whole goal of fostering is that the child gets to go back home or be with family, but they truly become your family in the process of you doing that. And so what are some of the things that you and your husband, your family have done, to kind of help yourself heal after this happens, to continue to, not be jaded or get a hard heart behind it?
Well, one story I can tell you, and it's funny because right now we have 7 children. And we, to answer your previous question, we adopted our last month. He was a complete surprise to us because we had adopted our 4-year-old and we said we were done. And then we got a call if we could just foster this little baby for 2 weeks until, basically we would take babies until their inoculations kicked in so they could go to daycare. And so I said, sure. We went and met this little baby in the NICU because he was born addicted to everything you can imagine. I mean, everything was in his system. And he went through some serious withdrawal for 2 weeks with seizures and lots of other stuff. And so we went and sat there in the NICU with him. And in the NICU, you don't realize the nurses have a job to do. And it's really not to hold babies, unfortunately. So these babies, especially abandoned ones, just lay in their play yard and they don't get any attention or anything, to the point where he had to wear a helmet for 6 months because his skull was malformed from laying in the bed for so long. And so, but my husband and I just looked at each other and we just said, we're gonna have to get a bigger car. And we just knew that he was going to be in our family. He was adopted last month, and he's doing great health-wise. Some issues, but praise God, nothing outlandish. And so we are not currently foster parents, and we are done. I have told them that. I said it in court. So this time it might stick. And so we are done fostering. We have foster blessings now that we're gonna, reach to the community and help with. And so, yeah, so that is another part. But also, as far as the healing, we had one little baby, and I mean, she was just the most beautiful baby you would ever see. And um, big cheeks, huge eyes. I mean, just happy little baby, happy little baby. She was about 3 months old. And we were agreeing to foster her for a month because we were going to adopt our Justin, and then we were leaving the next day to go on vacation. This vacation has been set up for like a year. We were leaving. And that day came for her to go to her new foster, her permanent foster home. And I brought her. And by the time I got back to my car, I was crying so hard. Like I had to pull over. And I knew this day was coming all month. It wasn't a surprise, but you just, fall in love. And it is, you can't understand it unless a child comes to live with you. It's like impossible to explain, because I have the people who say, only a foster child, you shouldn't be that upset, but when you're taking care of somebody 24/7, you bond. You do. And so she was hard, but then the next day we got up and there was joy because we were adopting our little Justin. So the ebbs and flows of foster care is pretty crazy. It is.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it's a lot of ups and downs, and a lot of emotions. And of course, I mean, how could it not be? Like, if you're talking about a whole nother life and a whole person. And I mean, I feel like even if you have a child for a week, when they're going through everything, they're every day with you, especially at a younger age, you're taking care of them, and there's going to be, if you have a heart, it's going to connect. Especially when children are most of the time placed in foster care because something has happened that was not favorable for the child, because they don't just put children in foster care just for the fun of it. And
Right.
so knowing sometimes that you have children who have dealt with trauma and that kind of thing also makes you more, susceptible to be really emotional in that situation. And I think it is so beautiful what you and your husband are doing and providing love and support for these children, because there are so many children out here who need that, who need a space, who need people who are willing to say, hey, I'm going to put my feelings aside and I'm going to do what's best for these children. And so, with your organization that you have, how long has it been around? I'm not sure I asked you that.
So we started in 2018, and I mean, we completely shut down through the whole pandemic. My husband actually, he lost his spleen a couple of years ago, and so he was, obviously on that list of people that cannot get COVID, and so everything kind of shut down in our family for a good year and a half. We were still able to do things like phone calls and things like that, for support. People have questions, and we were able to continue that, but so that took a good chunk of what we were doing away. And we had just held a diaper drive, and we had, I cannot even tell you how many packs of diapers at the church, which was cool because we got to kind of hand them out, to different churches and things that were doing different ministries. So that was a good way to connect. But yeah, so we've been around since about 2018, and we started very small, like I said, and we had our Instagram and Facebook pages, and then word just kind of started spreading, and we decided just to run with it. And our church is phenomenal. I mean, when I came to them with this idea, they were like, yeah, here's your budget and do it, just go. Our elder board is phenomenal. They just, and we have a lot of adopted and foster kids in our church community.
Okay, so what is some advice that you could give to maybe somebody who's in a similar position to you as you, who wants to help? If they maybe want to start their own ministry with their church or want to support foster families, you having been in foster care, being a foster family, what do you think are some ways that people can help support if they themselves maybe don't want to be a foster parent but want to support people who are?
And I can tell you that was another leg of this, was that, when we would get a placement, people would ask, what can I do? What can I do? And it's kind of awkward, you don't want to be like, oh, bring me a meal. So one of the things that we said was, instead of saying, what can I do? Say, I'm bringing a meal over Tuesday. Does Tuesday work for you? Okay. Thursday's better. Okay. Be proactive. Don't, sit back and say, oh, I'm going to the store. Give me 3 things that you need. Instead of leaving it on the foster family to say like, oh, what do I need? I don't know, kind of be proactive in that way. Also, so a little bit more of my story is when my mother passed away, I was 13, and um, really there was no like trauma informed therapy really at that time. I feel like it was just very fly by night. And I did not handle her death well, obviously. And so I ended up in a really bad place. I was homeless, on drugs, getting arrested. I mean, just really, when the cops would finally catch up to me, they would put me into another, which now I know is a therapeutic foster home. I did not know that at the time. But one of these foster homes that I ended up in was this woman who I walked in the door and she just got right into my face and was just, this is your home. This is your living room. This is your fridge. This is your room. You belong here. And it was just a weight just lifted off of me. And, because I had been in different homes where it was just awkward, as a troubled teen. But this one woman, and every night her and her husband would sit with me in the kitchen, in the living room, and they would just listen. They would just listen to my story. And it just really bonded us. I have no idea who they were. I don't even know if I could find them, but they were just amazing, amazing people. They did, at that time, it was the 1-800 US search to try to find my biological father for me. I mean, just really got into my world. And it was so powerful. And then I was only there for about a month. I was actually being shipped up to a rehab home for troubled teens, and which is a whole other story. But and really, like, one of the times that I was arrested, I had stolen a car, and we were joyriding, and I was running through the woods and away from the cops, and found this big boulder, and I'm hiding, and that prayer, oh God, if you get me out of this, I'll do anything. Well, it was right after that I went to this home for troubled teens. And the one thing that I kept coming back to was, in public school, you are taught that you are a bunch of cells. You're a bunch of cells that came from something, some kind of lightning hit something, billions of years ago. And I never had hope. And that was a big thing going into foster care, dealing with all the heaviness of my mother passing. I had no hope. And so I get to this place and I hear, wait, you're created. You are loved. You have a purpose. And all of a sudden I came to life and I was like, wait a minute, this is exactly what I've been looking for basically my whole life. And so that's basically how, my story kind of got turned around. Was 1996 was when I entered that facility, and totally heard a different story that had been preached to me my entire life, and became a Christian. And now here we are, many, many moons later. Totally different outlook, totally different life.
And you really answered my question, because when you started sharing a little bit more of your story, that was the next thing. I was like, so how did we bridge this gap from, troubled teen with a lot of trauma, obviously, and warranted. I mean, there's trauma that made sense. But to then going to this place where now you have your own ministry, you are a foster parent, you have adopted children. And so that is such a testament of God's grace to me, of where he can truly use everything that we've gone through and say it wasn't for no reason. And there are going to be people who have been blessed by the things that you have gone through. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, because we can either do one or two things when we have troubled past or trauma or anything that happens in our lives, and we can say, we can ball up in the corner and say my life is over and it's terrible, or we can say, how can I bless other people? And I truly feel like that is what you are doing, and that's why it's so inspirational to me, because it is one thing to pour out to people just for just because you want to, which is beautiful, but doing it also from a place of, I know exactly where you're coming from and how you feel. I think there's it's something that makes you a little bit more relatable and people can really receive from you. And so I thank you so much for sharing your story. I did want to ask you if you could give just a minute or so of just words of inspiration for maybe people who are foster parents or who have adopted, planning to adopt, to just encourage them, because it can be difficult. There's got to be a lot of self-care that takes place so that you have enough inside of you to pour out to other people. So if you could just encourage anyone who is listening, who wants to become a foster parent, wants to adopt, wants to support other foster parents, if you could just encourage them.
Yep. So I can say that it is hard. I am not going to lie. It is a hard thing, but it is worth it. Like when we think about the little boy that we had for a year and a half, he had a safe home, and he had loving arms, and he had siblings, and he had play dates. And there was many, many, many good things that came from that year and a half of hardness. And even now, we're kind of able to support his parents a little bit, on Facebook and stuff like that, and just kind of watch him grow up. And so there's so many different avenues of this. One thing that I know is that we were able to have biological parents over to our home. And so we had biological parents over who were, giving the kid a bath and giving them dinner, and, really forcing that reunification so that they didn't, because really, and I don't know how it is, but in New York, biological parents only get 1 hour a week unless the foster parent decides that they want to be a facilitator. And so just watching, the parents bond with the children. And I had one situation where our Justin was being evaluated, and in the room was bio parents, me, and the evaluator, and he kept coming back to me. And the biological dad picked him up, put him in my lap, and said, "This is where he belongs right now." So you can work so beautifully together with birth parents, even grandparents. Our little Roman, we're in constant contact with his grandparents because mom is unfortunately missing. And so, there's just so many different avenues that you can take with this, that it's not just the kids. You can also be a blessing to the caseworkers, when you actually make your appointments and do everything you can and make their job easier, because their job is stressful. So there's so many people that you can bless just doing this, not just the kids. I can tell you that.
Angela, thank you so much for sharing just a little bit of your story. And thank you, more importantly, for what you are doing. Like you said, not just for the kids, but for being a blessing to everybody that you come in contact with. I think that it's so awesome. I'm so excited to continue following you, hearing more about your ministry, seeing what you guys are doing, and seeing how you're really impacting people. Because I think there is something beautiful in taking something that may be simple as a meal and really using it to connect and make someone else's life easier. I want to thank everybody for listening to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. Angela, could you please let us know where we can find you and where we can find more information about your ministry?
Yep. So we're on Instagram at foster_blessings EFC. And we are also on Facebook at Foster Blessings Meals Ministry. We have an email. It's fosterblessingsefc@gmail.com. And our phone number is 845-516-4218. Those are our main avenues of contact. And, if anybody's listening in our area, it's Evangelical Church in Clinton Corners, New York.
And I'm going to put all that information down below. So if you are watching us on Facebook Live or YouTube, all the information will be down below. And if you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can go to unmuteyourmic.org and go to our show notes. And you will find all the information, learn more about Angela. You'll be able to see any resources that will be available. I'm going to put a lot of resources for people just in who are adopting in multiple states, because I think it's important to know that you are not doing this alone and you are appreciated. Angela, thank you so much again. It has been a true blessing to talk to you. Thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. And please be bold, be heard. Continue to unmute your mic. Continue to tell your story. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Unmute Your Mic. Be sure to tune in next time when Jessica takes her mic off mute as she continues her journey to find stories that inspire and uplift our communities.